last week we finished up with Joel. Only three chapters. We finished up with Joel last week. And this week we're going to get into Obadiah. If you want to go ahead and turn to Obadiah, we'll start in on the text here in just a few moments. The first of the prophets was Elijah. He's called a major prophet. It's not because he was any more important, it's just that he wrote more. That's really all that it was. There's a lot more of his writings in the scriptures than there were the so-called minor prophets. But first there was Elijah. He was a prophet. Who was he sent to? The northern or the southern kingdom? You're right. It was the northern kingdom under King Ahab. Now, Ahab, if anyone needed a prophet, it was Ahab. That man was a bad man. All right, and we're gonna find where Ahab kind of leads into our the next prophet, Obadiah. All right, next who was the prophet after Elijah? Elisha. Who was Elisha sent to? Northern or the southern kingdom? Was he? He replaced Elijah, but who was he sent to? No. He was sent to the northern kingdom too. He was sent to the northern kingdom under King Jehu. All right? Now remember, northern kingdom did not have a good king. They were all bad. They were all evil kings. All right? Let's put it this way. They were bad kings. They were bad kings. All right? Elisha was sent to the northern kingdom under King Jehu. And his contemporary in the southern kingdom under Queen Athaliah was Obadiah. So Obadiah was sent to the southern kingdom under Queen Athaliah. Now, how many people know about Queen Athaliah? You don't hear too much about her. And I'm going to read a little bit of a biography, just a little bit of information about her, because it kind of helps to know, who's this person. They were sent to the kings. They didn't go to the small towns. They went to the kings and prophesied in the capital towns. And that's why that's how these things were written down. That's how they were distributed to everybody else. Okay? So Athaliah is usually considered the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel. So, knowing that, was she someone who was brought up right? No. She was brought up by an especially wicked mother and a king who, up until the very end, refused to come under God's rule. He rebelled and he rebelled and he rebelled. And a lot of it had to do with the influence of his wicked wife. Okay? So she's typically considered the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel. Athaliah was married to Jehoram of Judah to seal a treaty between the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And to secure his position, Jehoram killed his 6 brothers. So you talk about palace intrigue, the Bible is full of it. It's just not spoken about that much. Okay? So he killed his 6 brothers. Jehoram became king of Judah in the 5th year of Jehoram of Israel's reign. Jehoram of Israel was Athaliah's brother or possibly nephew. A lot of times the nomenclature is a little bit different. Abraham called Sarah his wife, but she was also his sister. Yeah. So those things, the nomenclature changed just a little bit, depending on who you were talking about and the relationship that was there. Jehoram of Judah reigned for 8 years. His father Jehoshaphat and grandfather Asa were good kings or bad kings? Good kings. They were devout kings. They worshiped the Lord and walked in His ways. But Jehoram chose not to follow their example, but he rejected God and he married Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab, in the line of Omri. Now, Jehoram's rule of Judah was a little bit of a shaky. He didn't firmly cement his power. That happened sometimes, especially back then. You might have a part of the kingdom that was completely devoted to him, but then you might have a part that was maybe in the outskirts that didn't quite want to come into line. Maybe they preferred someone else who should have been on the throne. Remember, he had 6 brothers that possibly could have been better kings, but he had them killed. And so they may have been loyal and hoping that one of them would become king, and they were not completely loyal. Okay? So, after Jehoram's death, Ahaziah became king of Judah, and Athaliah was considered what we would call queen mother. Okay? Kind of like in Britain, you have the queen mother, then you have the queen regent. Ahaziah reigned for 1 year from the age of 22 to 23, and then was killed during a state visit to Israel, along with Jehoram of Israel. Now, you were talking about trying to come up with a treaty or a truce between the two. When one of your rulers gets killed on a state visit to the other place, is that going to foster good relations, or is that going to kill good relations? Oh, absolutely. You can imagine if somebody from another country came to this country and was killed in an assassination attempt, especially by an American national, that would absolutely destroy, not irreparably, but it would absolutely devastate relations between the two of us. And that was the whole point, was try to bring those nations back together, not because of a belief and a desire to be true to God, but a desire to rule ever-increasing territory. There was never a thing in their mind of, hey, we need to become united again under God. It was, we need to be united again so that whoever's controlling it controls everything. All right. Jehu assassinated them both in Yahweh's name. Jehu assassinated them both in Yahweh's name and became king of Israel. He had Athaliah's entire extended family in Israel put to death, ending the Omri dynasty in Israel. For her part, this is that's all about what happened around her. What was she like? Well, for her part, Athaliah seized the throne of Judah and ordered the execution of all possible claimants to the throne, including the remnant of her Omri dynasty. So, what do we know about Queen Athaliah? She is not a good person, okay? Athalia, Athaliah. Athaliah, Athalia, Athaliah. Yes. Okay, however, Jehosheba, Ahaziah's sister, managed to rescue from the purge one of Athaliah's grandsons with Jehoram of Judah. His name was Jehoash, who was only 1 year old. So this is a 1-year-old that would have been killed had he not been rescued by somebody else. I mean, that's how ruthless she was. It was assassinate them all, because remember, lineage came through the blood. It wasn't a matter of whether someone wanted to be there or not. It wasn't a matter. Even if he managed to escape and flee, he could always come back and claim his rightful place in the kingly lineage. Okay, so the only option open to her, or so she thought, was to have them all killed, executed, destroy them all. That way, nobody can come back and challenge her right to the throne. All right. Jehoash was raised in secret by Jehosheba's husband, a priest named Jehoiada. As queen, Athaliah used her power to establish the worship of Baal in Judah. Okay, this is an appearance of one of the Baals. Baal. One thing about the Baals, there were many different Baals. Okay, this was not a one particular deity that every worship was all the same. There were different Baals. She established a Baal worship in Judah. And 6 years later, Athaliah was surprised when Jehoiada revealed that Jehoash lived and proclaimed him king of Judah. She didn't do her job. Her job was to kill them all. She didn't do it, and guess what? Exactly what she feared came to pass. This young fella came back and was proclaimed king of Judah. She rushed to stop the rebellion. Now think about it. You had a lot of people who wanted her gone, and this was their opportunity. This was a chance. Because now there's a rebellion. She tried to stop the rebellion, but she was captured and executed. Okay, this is the contemporary of Obadiah. This is who he's pronouncing. This is who he's pronouncing judgment to. Is this Queen Athaliah and everyone who is surrounding her and those who are in positions of power. You think about what it would be like to live under that kind of capricious. I mean, God told him, you don't want a king. You don't want a king. If you accept a king, this is what's going to happen to you. So all of these things that are befalling them, many of them come from the top down. He says, don't do this, because they're going to do all of these things. They're going to take everything that you've got. They're going to make your lives miserable. And you can imagine, if you weren't part of the wealthy elite, if you weren't part of the ruling class, your life was, in many cases, really kind of miserable. Because everything that you worked for, think about what Ahab did. If Ahab wanted that vineyard, what did he do? He went and took it. He didn't think anything about it. And he went and pouted like a 4-year-old. And then his wife said, I'll take care of this, being the wicked woman she was. And she went and she took that vineyard. Okay? So, they asked for it. Now, I hate for it, because there are generations that came up after and said, we didn't ask for a king. Well, that went to the idea that the children are punished for the sins of the father. Not personally. I can't be punished for my father's errors, but I could certainly feel the consequences. That's exactly what's happening. All right, so let's look at the book of Obadiah, and we'll go through it. How many chapters is Obadiah? 1 chapter. So we'll finish this either today or next week, and we'll move on to something else. So now don't get too comfortable, because there's a couple where we've got 5 or 6 chapters. So don't think it's all going to be like this. All right, so let's look at this. Obadiah, only chapter, verse 1. The vision of Obadiah. This tells us what? Right off the bat, it establishes what? Yeah, it's right, that he is a prophet. And next, thus saith the Lord Jehovah concerning Edom. What does that tell us? It is coming from God. This man speaks on behalf of God. He is divinely inspired. He has been inspired by the Holy Spirit, and he is speaking as God speaks. He is not interjecting his own personal opinions into it. He is saying exactly what God tells him to say, no more and no less, which tells us also this. Do we need anything from God other than what he has told us? Do we need to interject ourselves and do any of it? No. What God has pronounced, what God has given us in Scripture is completely perfect for what we need. We need nothing more. I found it. I was watching one of these guys, these televangelists, and it seems like they become more of a production than they are anything else. And this guy had, he had like the lineup of the service was, the interlude, and then you had some worship music, and then you had this guy was going to come up and speak. He wasn't the preacher. He was just going to come up and speak. He said a few words, and then this lady came up and gave a little bit of an announcement, and then you had a guest speaker that was going to come on. Guess what this guest speaker was doing? He wanted to plug his book. He said, it's for sale out in the lobby, and, I invite you to, and I found it very interesting that, a lot of these books, it's just we're adding to something that doesn't need to be added to, It was kind of like almost like a variety show. I hate to be that ugly about it, but it really was. And I didn't hear one verse of Scripture. It was all about how good you can feel about this, and if you just believe in yourself, and God loves you, which He does. But there was no admonition. There was no exhortation. There was no criticism. There was nothing. It was just very like eating cotton candy. You eat it, and then later on, you really kind of feel a little sick to your stomach for having done it. So anyway, all right. So we know this is a vision of Obadiah the prophet. It is coming from Jehovah God. When Jehovah God speaks, what do? We listen. At least if we're smart, that's what we do. Well, Athaliah ended up having to kill a bunch of people. Everybody almost was going to kill a 1-year-old, and instituted Baal worship, and then tried to stop a rebellion for the rightful ruler of Judah. She was captured and executed. Do you think she was listening to Obadiah? No. All right, so let's continue on. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah concerning Edom. Now, who is Edom? Esau. All right, Esau. So what do we get from this? These are the descendants of Esau that he's speaking of. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah concerning Edom. This is a prophecy concerning these people. We have heard tidings from Jehovah, and an ambassador is sent among the nations, saying, Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Okay, so just breaking this down a little bit. Vision of Obadiah, this is the title of the prophecy. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah. This applies to the entire prophecy. It's not just to the part regarding the people of Edom. This is regarding the entire thing. Everything he's going to speak comes from Jehovah God. An ambassador is sent among the nations. All right. God, what did God use to humble Israel and Judah? Okay. What specifically did He use? He used that captivity, but who specifically did He use? The outside world, the nations of. For the nation of Israel, He used the other one. Babylon's for the southern kingdom. The Assyrians, okay? So He uses the nations outside. It's interesting that He uses nations that don't know Him. He uses nations that do not regard Him. He uses nations that actually come in and mock the people of God for worshiping God. He actually uses these people. I think it's an effort to and I want to make sure that we use the word correctly. It's an effort that God uses to humiliate his people. Now, we think of the word humiliated in a very negative fashion, do we not? I mean, rightfully so. Nobody wants to be humiliated. Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing. They did, and what we have to look at is this. God directed them. In some cases, the people are being directed, and they don't even know that they're being directed. But if you think about it, even in the book of Genesis, remember, did the Lord, when Abraham told the king that his wife was actually his sister, what happened? Why did he stop, though? Remember what happened that night? God came and spoke to him directly. See, what we read about are the things that God's telling to his people. But if you also remember this, who went and spoke to the people of Nineveh? Jonah. He went and spoke directly to that king of Nineveh. He spoke directly to him. So do people outside of God's people, do those of the nations get direction from God as well? Yeah. Sometimes it's not spoken. Sometimes it is a simple matter of withdrawing protection. Sometimes it's a matter of specific prophecy. God told Cyrus the Great to release his people. He told him that specifically. It wasn't just, well, if you want to, send them back. He had said that my people are going to return home, and I'm going to direct the king to do that. So how he did that, don't know. Did he come to him at night in a dream? Don't know. So in regards to the Assyrian army, did God come and speak to that ruler in the middle of the night and say, now's the time, I want you to strike, I want you to bring back? Don't know. It's possible that he did, but it's also possible that he just said, I'm just withdrawing my protection from you. And I'm allowing the people to do what they were going to do anyway, which is come in, sack the place, take you on to captivity, and be done. So the answer to the question is, don't know. Don't know. I know in either way, God's hand was in it, whether he actually physically came to him in a vision and told him to do that, or just withdrew his protection. God, it was absolutely 100%. He determined exactly when it was going to happen and how it was going to happen. And then in the same method, he sent his people back in the same exact way, in a method of his choosing, at a time of his choosing. And it's funny because, these kings are probably coming in, and it may have been that he may have not told them because he may have allowed them to think that it was they themselves that allowed them to do that. It would have been kind of a hollow victory if he said, well, we're coming in, but, God told us to do it. It would have been a little bit more of a victory if they came in and thought that they were doing it of their own power, and then when God came in and caused his people to be released, they knew that it was God causing it to happen. I don't know. But it could have happened either way. Yes, ma'am. Oh, it talks about the end times. It's the idea of the end times, and we're not going to get into this post-apocalyptic type of mindset. But God still is in control of the world in which we live. He will give protection. He will withdraw protection. He will bless and he will curse. He'll do all of those things. How he does them now, don't know, because we don't have prophets anymore. This is all we got. But you know what? It's enough. Okay, so continue on. So God's instrument, one of the things that he uses to humble a proud and sinful nation, especially in regards to Israel, because remember Israel remained in sin. It continued to be in sin. Is usually, of course, that of other nations. What better way to do it than to send in a country from the nations, a pagan, idolatrous group, to come in and humble his people? And that's exactly what was happening. Of course, in the case of Israel, it was Assyria, and Judah, it was Babylon. All right? In this case, in this idea of this prophecy against the Edomites, it's going to be a confederacy of nations. And this confederacy of nations is going to destroy Edom. And we're going to get into how the Edomites had developed, what they had become before we get out of Obadiah. But this idea that Edom was a nation of strongholds, and it would have been very difficult for one nation of itself to destroy Edom. But God is prophesying here that there will be a confederacy of nations that's going to destroy Edom. Now, in the historical record, we realize that this judgment didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some great one-time big event. You know, a lot of times you can look back at countries and you can see there's one turning point, right? There's one turning point in all of these. The Battle of Hastings, Waterloo, the Battle of New Orleans. All of these, there's like many times there's one event that turns the fortunes of everything, but not so in the case of Edom. The Edomites fell over time, and they fell. But you know what? That's what happened with Judah, right? It fell a little at a time. They kept trying to make truces. They kept trying to make treaties to kind of shore up their power, and over time, it just eventually disappeared. Until finally, there was really not much to defend when the Babylonians finally came in, and God had weakened them so badly that when they came in, and God was probably even sparing His people at that point, because if the people of Judah had remained strong and there had been one mighty battle to come in and take the whole place, it probably would have killed even more people. So what God did was slowly weaken their defenses until they came in, and they really came in, and all things considered, compared to what they used to be able to do, it wasn't much of a fight that Judah was able to put up. It probably spared a great many lives that would have been lost otherwise. So once again, God's looking out for His people. Okay. All right. So anyway, there's a succession of defeats by a group of a confederacy of nations, and this confederacy slowly beats down the Edomites until finally they once again, like every other nation that stands against God, is swept into the dustbin of history. You know, their strongholds. Weird lights went out in the hallway. The strongholds that once held a mighty nation have finally been. They're gone. There's nothing left. Okay, these people were the Nabateans. I don't have to write these down if you don't want to, but here they are. The Nabateans, the Babylonians. Babylonians came in. Israel itself was part of their downfall. The Maccabees. Who are the Maccabees? Who were the Maccabees? They're fairly well known, but a lot of people don't know who they were. We talked about this in the intertestamental period, the class we had on the intertestamental period. The Maccabees were a group of Jewish patriots. Let's use the word. They were patriots. They despised what had happened to the Jewish state over the years, and they led a rebellion I don't want to get too much into the study of the Maccabees, but they led this rebellion to restore true worship to God. And that's exactly, it's interesting because that's what they did to the Edomites. When the Maccabees came in for their part of this whole destruction of Edom, it's interesting what they made them do. They made every man in the Edomite nation undergo the rite of circumcision, and then they forced them to read the law of Moses and to begin to implement it. I mean, the Maccabees, they were serious. These guys were not just scholars. These guys were warriors. They were serious business, and they did a fantastic job at bringing. Yes, sir. The book of Maccabees is one of those apocryphal books. It's one that, for many people, it's considered essential reading. It's not considered canon, of course, in the scriptures because it would be there. But yes, the book of there are actually two books of Maccabees. It's not First and Second Maccabees, but there are two books of the Maccabees that very much describe everything that they did, their beginnings. What they did was they were both land patriots and patriots for the Mosaic Law. They were both. So, yes, absolutely. That's it. And if you study the celebration of Hanukkah, it very much talks about the Maccabees. There was just enough oil for that lamp to last, and it was a miraculous thing. It was in the temple. Yeah, very much. This is historic fact. This is not a. Well, we think we know a little bit. The Maccabees were very much a very real people, and they very much did very real things, and they were very impressive what they were able to accomplish with a relatively small group of people. So was God behind the Maccabees coming in and being part of the destruction of Edom? Yeah, certainly was. Certainly was. See, if the people had always remained as strong and as firm in their belief as that group of Maccabees were, nations never would have fallen in the first place. But it took a threat of the Jews being wiped off the planet for the Maccabees to finally rise up and do the things that they did. So yes, it is very much a real writings. They're just not considered part of Scripture because they are not what we would consider to be divinely inspired. It's a book of history. And I encourage you to read it, because there's some really great history in it. Yes. It's just, like I said, there's a lot of books that it's not that they're incorrect. They're just not divinely. It wasn't someone speaking on behalf of God. It was a historical reference, historical record. All right. Okay. So we had the Nabateans, we had the Babylonians, we have Israel itself. Then we got the Maccabees, and then finally, of course, the destruction to end all destruction comes through who? Who finally swept away the last vestiges of the Jewish faith? In AD 70. Nope. Roman Empire, very good. In AD 70, the Romans came in and they are going to show everybody who's boss. And they wiped the Edomites, they destroyed the temple. They were a scourge of God. They truly were. If you think that God didn't have a hand in the Romans, He absolutely did. We like to think about these other nations, but God was behind the Romans. Why was God behind the Romans? Why was it so necessary for the temple to be destroyed? Yeah. That's right. It was prophecy. It was prophesied that the temple would be destroyed. So what has to happen? The temple has to be destroyed because God doesn't lie. He said it will be destroyed, and I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to destroy it. Interesting. Okay. All right. So what happened was David wanted desperately to build a permanent structure to God. I mean, remember David asked, I want to build this. He says, no, I don't want you to because you're a man of war. Your hands are covered in blood, figuratively. You're not going to do that, but your son is going to build this temple for me. And God gave him the dimensions. He gave him all of those things. God wanted the temple. The problem was this. The first temple was built under the auspices of God's direction. This is what's going to happen. Then the temple was destroyed and it was rebuilt yet again. Remember who rebuilt it the second time? What's that? Zechariah. Then it was destroyed again. Then who rebuilt it? Herod. Remember Herod's temple. The temple of Herod. The Zechariah was even rebuilt under God's auspices, but the temple under Herod was built by a man whose thoughts were far away from God. He was not a man after God's heart. He wanted to rebuild it to show everyone, to display his power and his magnificence to his people. And that temple was not approved by God. God didn't tell him to rebuild it. Okay? And he says, God's decision was to destroy the temple. And the reason he wanted to destroy the temple was because he wanted to remove everything. He wanted to remove the one thing that still held Judaism as a link to him. If that temple is still there, there are still people there. Let me give you this reason. Joseph, and understand what I'm saying by this. Joseph Mengele was captured and he was executed. What was the reason they burned his body and they scattered his ashes? Why didn't they bury him? What were they worried about? They didn't want this burial place to become a shrine for neo-Nazi. That's what would have happened, right? I mean, that's what happens. People's burial places become a shrine to people. And what God, he wasn't necessarily worried about. What he didn't want was the temple to remain a place where people could come and feel that when they worshiped there, that that worship was accepted. So he said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to destroy the temple. There's no place for you to worship anymore. There's no place to come and offer. There's no place to come and give up sacrifices. There's no place to come and do all these things anymore. I'm taking it away. Even today, there is no temple. There is no temple. Why is there no temple? God hadn't allowed there to be one. How did God prevent the temple from being rebuilt? Who occupies it right now? The Muslims, the Temple of the Rock. That Temple of the Rock is square exactly where the temple would be. They can't rebuild it. If they can't rebuild it, they can't institute the old priesthood. They can't do any of the things. So what does that do? It basically handcuffs them. God said He was going to do that. The last vestiges of the Jewish faith are going to be swept away. Anybody, are we going out on YouTube yet? We're not going out on YouTube, are we? I want to make sure everybody understands this is not a criticism of the Jews. This is prophecy. God destroyed the temple so that the church of Jesus Christ would be the only link to Him. There is no temple, and there's no temple because God doesn't want there to be a temple. If God doesn't want there to be a temple, will there ever be a temple? No. That temple will never be rebuilt. What happens when we decide to make plans to thwart God? Who's going to end up on who's going to hit the losing end of that? We are, every time. And woe to the person who feels that they can subvert God's will. I mean, we're reading about that now. Okay, that's what's happening with the Edomites. Okay, so the Romans came in at the very end in AD 70, and at this point, the Edomites, everything that's remained, or everything that remained of them is gone. You don't even find descendants of the Edomites anymore. Okay, so this is what's happening. Edom disappears from history in AD 70, and after this general destruction of the Romans. Basically, every single, it's like chipping away at something. Every single one of these nations chips away a little bit, and finally in AD 70, the Romans come in and kind of finish up all the general devastation, and they're swept away. The Edomites are no more. So verse 2, behold, I have made thee I have made thee small among the nations. Thou art greatly despised. All right. Now, we understand that this is a prophecy, so this is something that's going to happen later. This is not something that's happening now. Obadiah is talking about something that's going to happen in the future. And in the case of the Edomites, it's going to be in the near future, but he is talking about something that's still to come. So when he says this, I have made thee small among the nations, it's not talking about now. Right now, they are a great nation. They are a powerful nation. And we'll talk about why here in just a little. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. The Edomites occupied a kind of an unusual place. And let me see if I want to find. It's a place called Mount Seir. Mount Seir. It's kind of a rugged country. It's kind of a rough, very hardscrabble country that's a little bit south of Palestine, and it extends to the Gulf of Aqaba. Their principal city was called Petra. Why do you think it was called Petra? Rock. So where do you think they made their country? It's carved out of sheer rock, and it's the pictures of it are impressive. They really they carved out temples, they carved out municipal buildings, they carved out dwellings, they carved everything of all of this out of solid rock. So when you're occupying a place made out of solid rock, high up in the mountains, and it's the only way to get in is through a very narrow valley to get in. Do you think they occupied a place of relative safety and refuge? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, going into a little bit further, the idea, we'll talk about this a little bit more next week. When the prophets are prophesying the destruction of Judah and Israel, and he says, "Flee to the mountains." Even if you flee to the mountains, who can save you? This is what he's talking about. What he's doing here is he's saying, guess what? It didn't help the Edomites. Flee to the mountains. Go ahead and flee to the mountains. Who can save you there? The Edomites weren't even saved, being where they were in this mountain of solid rock, in this nation of solid rock. It didn't help the Edomites. Go ahead. Run to the mountains. Run to these places carved out of solid rock. See if it helps you. It's not. Why? Because God's behind the destruction. He destroyed the Edomites, and he's going to destroy you no matter where you go. You can go down as far you want to the depths of the earth. You can climb up into the mountains where in the solid rock. It's not going to save you because God is behind the destruction. Same with the Edomites. Okay? But he says, behold, I've made thee small among the nations. So he's talking about something in the future. I will bring you low. I'm going to make you small. I'm going to make you insignificant because of what you've done. And there's going to be a big difference between where you were and the place you're going to occupy in the future. And we see this, he prophesied against the Edomites, the kingdom of Israel and Judah were prophesied against, and it seems like all the prophecies are kind of similar. First you were here, I'm going to bring you here. I'm going to humiliate you. I'm going to humble you. And in the case of the Edomites, though, the case of Israel and Judah, they were going to be allowed to come back to their homeland. But the Edomites were never going to be allowed to occupy their homeland again. They were going to be destroyed. All right, continuing on, real quick, and then we'll finish up. Verse 3, the pride of thy heart hath deceived you, O thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? So occupying the position that they did, both financially, and they were a very, very prosperous nation. The Edomites were very prosperous. Because guess what? If you had goods and they needed to be protected, where did you take them? Took them to the Edomites. They had storehouses. They had vast emporiums in the mountains. And these kings who wanted to protect their treasure, protect all of their stuff, they would bring it to the Edomites and they would hang on to it for them. They were a very safe place to put your stuff. You know, kind of like if we have something precious, we take it and put it in the bank in a safety deposit box. This was basically the same thing. They would bring all of these goods, they would bring all of this stuff, and they would keep it. And when they needed it, they would come and get it. They were very proud of their position. They were proud of their position that they occupied both physically and in stature among the nations. So their debasement was doubly humiliating. It was doubly humiliating. God not only brings them down out of that fortress that they had carved out for themselves, but He also makes them insignificant in the face of everyone that once held them in great esteem, held them high in regards to the nations. Okay, but what is it that did this to them? First part of verse 3. The pride, what the old saying, comes from the Bible, right? What goeth before a fall? Pride. Where do we see this? Yeah, very much so everywhere. In this case, though, it was the Edomites. Where were they? They were up here. They had pride in their heart. And then what happens? What did they do? They fell. Pride goeth before the fall. All the time, right? All the time. This is exactly what happened. The Israelites were proud. The nation of Judah was proud. All the nations were pride. God despises pride. Let me tell you, God despises pride. It's probably one of those that he gets most frustrated with because He said, no one should occupy that place in your heart except for me. When we have pride, what it does is it displaces God, and God doesn't like that at all. He wants to occupy that position solely in our hearts. And when we have pride, we basically are pushing Him out to make way for ourselves. And that's exactly what happens. All right, we'll finish up there. We'll start in verse 4, and we'll probably finish up next week. But go ahead and read that. Jot down any notes you might have, and we'll discuss this next week. Thank you so much.